we were getting into the micronutrient discussion. We were heading to, like the first step we would come bring up was the same way we put it to bed with the advance that we used, which has got some phosphate in it. It's got a micronutrient package in it. It's got some sugars in it. It's got some biology in it. And it's got some stretch relief material in it. So, the same thing we were talking about with energy conversion leading up to this is we give the plant hormones and tell it everything is okay.
That's what
it's a stressful situation, keep producing like you would day in and day out, and compare that with the energy source and the micronutrients that we need for all the different processes, help fight disease, stuff like that.
This is what I was looking for a while ago, and I'm like, where'd it go?
Yeah.
Fine. Because one of the things that we ran into 15 years ago was when you come out of the late winter like this and into spring, they were complaining about the fact that the roots just wouldn't come on the plants. You couldn't cut it. Just nothing was happening. So it's coming out of the dormancy. It's getting ready to green up, or you might see a few green sprigs starting to show out there. What's your first reaction when you see that normally? Those of you who've been growing sod for a long time, what's your first reaction? Push it. And you're going to do what? How are you going to push it? Fertilize that sucker. Now, if you understand, depending on what you've done, how you've done it, and you've been watching what we're talking about here, you picked the wrong fertilizer, what's it going to do to the roots? It's going to respond just like the homeowner's grass does. It's going to be pretty grass. And you're out there going, man, this grass looks pretty. You put a cutter in there, and it won't do squat. And that particular year that they called was a bad rhizome year and a bad gray leaf spot year for the guys that are trying to get us. And they're like, we need to fix this. So I said, well, we're going to go out here and we're going to put in some SG Advance. Why? Well, the SG Advance at 2 quarts to the acre has a multifaceted foliar blend. It's all several things together. It's got NPK in small quantities in the right forms. It's got micronutrients in small quantities in right forms and protectants. We have a little bit of Defender in there. Defender is urea phosphite. Urea phosphite, not phosphate, urea phosphite is completely mobile within the plant, and it will move into the leaves, and it will run down through the roots, through the sugar tubes that go out to the roots, and down to the roots and out of the roots, and it will clean out the plug system within the plant, and when it exudes around the outside of the roots, it keeps the Pythium and the Phytophthora and several other diseases at bay. And it also has a really good activity alone on its own on the top of the soil and the leaves for gray leaf spot and rhizoctonia. So it's a fertilizer, if you will, that's a fungicide because it pumps up the plant and lets the plant do the things it needs to do. So I said, well, we're going to go out with ammonium sulfate. We're going to go out with this because it also has kelp extract and amino acids. Go figure. Beneficial for key times going into beneficial for key times going into and out of dormancy when the plant system and the metabolic rates are shifting. Because it's like the plant said, hey, I want to wake up, I want to take off. So don't mess with me. Help me along here. I'd rather go for a day or two in slow motion and then kick in. This is designed to help that happen. And it did. I mean, I think people were surprised. They're like, I've never heard of fertilizer control a disease. Well, you don't understand how fertilizer works. Certain fertilizers do, others make it badly worse. Because you can imagine if you threw out urea or you threw out ammonium nitrate and you had all that nitrate, the bad guys like the nitrate, and there's boatloads of bad guys there. So bam, just like that, you told the plant, I need you to grow tops, I don't want you to grow roots. And by the way, bad guys chew away. It's a bad situation. When we started into this system, overnight people started calling and saying, what's in that stuff? Never seen anything like this before.
So it's a load of phosphate that would act fungicide.
Yeah, it's got phosphates in
Running
it.
on a golf course would be, in golf, they sell just phosphate.
Yes, you can. And you
Big
can,
business.
Yes, it is big business.
Yeah, they'll start early and go through
Right.
the year, cut down.
Right. And, it's one of the reasons it's big business is there's no resistance to it.
Yeah.
Because what's going on is these bad guy microbes have always learned that when you go out and spread phosphate's PO4. 4 oxygens around the phosphorus, PO4. Phosphite is PO3. Those 3 phosphites are married so tightly, or those three oxygens are married so tightly to that phosphorus, it's not giving up the oxygen. What the microbes used to do is they used to go in there and pull off their oxygen in an anaerobic situation. They'll just pull the oxygen off the phosphate. That's how they get their oxygen. Anaerobic situations, that's when the diseases spread fast, right? So they're getting the oxygen off the very phosphate you're feeding the plant. You feed them phosphite, they sit there and they tug, and they tug, and they tug on this oxygen to try to get the oxygen. It can't be gotten. And when it can't be gotten, what happens to them?
They die.
They die. And there is no resistance to this. So phosphites for years have been used to be able to control Pythium, Phytophthora, and several other things that show up on the roots. But Pythium and Phytophthora, boom, it just knocks them.
Are we talking about bad bacteria or bad?
This is bad fungus in this particular case. They're all kind of down there together. I mean, there's fungus and bacteria all down there. But, I mean, they are really bacteria that are.
So we sell Defender K, which is the standalone phosphite, like you're talking.
Yeah.
But we use that product in advance.
So
It's part of the blend.
Yeah.
So that's just to clarify what that is, yeah.
And so,
real quick, on the microbe thing we were talking about, just to put in your head, so if you see like competitive products out there, and there's a ton of them with different microbes, you can see with that product Accelerate how diverse it is and how many different species. But if you see something that's like got one or two things in it, you kind of have to ask yourself a question about what you're buying and how much it costs, right? Not saying it's a bad product, but if it's just very simple, it's like, well, where's the diversification? What am I getting out of this product that might be, it's probably going to be more expensive than Accelerate from what I know in the market.
Yeah.
We actually are producing all our own microbes we started in about April of 25, where all of the microorganisms that go in those products, Complement, Accelerate that they just showed, which are also in a lot of our blends, are made in Indiana at the facility that Dan is at. So, and we have a microbiologist, so we know we're not now buying, we used to buy microbes and put in these, but then we're subject to understanding what that supplier told us, what's in there, what are the quantities, what are the species. That's all done now. We know exactly what's in that product, how many species and what the jobs are. And if you look at those charts we have in there now compared to the one we had before, there's a lot more X's on there than there used to be because now we're able to find that out for ourselves. So, and due to the fact that we're now producing them, the costs of those materials have dropped. We brought the cost down on Accelerate and a lot of our other blends this year going into 26 because we're not subject to buying them outside and paying higher prices. So some good things in that realm, and there's a lot more going to happen on that biological side with our products and what we're doing. So
the next 2 years, you're going to see a lot of things come out. Pesticide degraders, if you will. They'll break down the pesticides. They'll break down the remains that doesn't need to stay there. The carriers are wicked in some cases. The carriers in some cases are far, far worse than the chemicals ever thought about being. So we can actually start cleaning up the root zones and cleaning out a lot of stuff, and then adding additional things in here that kind of help out compete some of the bad guy organisms. We took this on at the Montrose farm there at Bradbury several years back. The one guy who's working there said, "Now you could have manipulated this. You could have just went all over the farm and gathered that stuff up." I said, "You're one cold-hearted SOB. You think I'm going to stand out here and start making this stuff up? I don't have to make it up. It does it for itself." The treatments speak for themselves in terms of the root depth. In this particular case over here, this was the untreated and this was the treated. And you have to understand that as you're on this program and you're working better and you're making more and more roots all the time, one of the key things that's important about this is the rate of regrowth. You cut this off and the depth of these roots are down so far and the rhizomes are down, and the guys that cut it there at Montrose, they're like, "Man, we're cutting through a lot of rhizomes because they're there." And when you cut those rhizomes, if you understand the physiology of the plant, once you cut the rhizome, that causes the buds on the rhizome to pop. Cutting the rhizome makes the rest of the buds pop. So when you cut it and they're there, boom, from most of the buds comes a brand new sprig, and you're off to the races. And that's one of the best things that we have with people comment. It's like, "Man, I just never had regrowth like this. I don't have to interseed or reseed or do something. This stuff is just off to the races." I'm like, yes, because it's now maintaining a much higher level of energy. This is all energy. It's like, oh, you don't use fertilizer as much to make these roots. This is extra stored energy for that plant. That's the whole thing behind it. It doesn't mean that you can't do it, but it's not all fertilizer, guys. It's energy. And we had different crops of different types of sod on the farm, and every time you got into the treated side, the roots were way, way deeper, and it's all common sense. I mean, those are things that we know. It's just great confirmation to see it, and in this particular situation, we knocked all the soil off just to look at the root mass. And what's different is look at all the fine roots. You've got heavier roots. You've got a lot of fine roots, and it's the fine roots that are doing the work of absorbing all of the phosphate in the soil. Phosphate cannot be moved to a plant from the soil standpoint. Roots must intercept it. And I think what you got to realize is, and I'll show you here this in a few minutes, but I'll just say it right now. Microbes, when they release phosphate as orthophosphate, it's the same phosphate that we're buying in most of the cases out here from the industry. It's the same orthophosphate that's in 7,25,5, our liquid product. They're one and the same. So if you get the microbes cranked up and they're releasing it, are you going to start a microbe here to release phosphate with a root over here and expect that root to find it? No. The microbe has to be at the root. That's why when you see the pictures, and I had another movie, but we're not going to show it today, about all the microbes working around the soil. They're in the root, they're on the root, they're around the root all the time, because that's how they get their signals, that's how they do their work, that's where they release the nutrients, and it's around all these fine roots that everything starts getting done. It's fascinating when you look at it. And when you start looking at the fields, it gets tight, it's well managed, it's easier to keep the weeds down. There's all kinds of positives that start in this. And again, when you cut it, then the rate of regrowth changes and it comes back faster. And this is how the guys are saying, well, we're starting to pick up on our cycle. We're getting a lot more cycles of crops. It's no surprise, it better start happening, right? Part 2, maximize the sugar production. You can imagine if it's a sugar machine and it lives and dies on its sugar, and making sugar in high levels and keeping it in there and moving it around is critical. 725.5 at a gallon to the acre, which is a high orthophosphate, that's the available form. The poly, which is part of 1034O, is not available. They're long chains, have to be broken down to be made available, which the microbes do, but they don't do it fast enough as you would see if you were using this, because this is one of the reasons why you can use lower levels, and I'll show you that here in a minute. It increases the crop energy chemically. Plants live and die on ATP, adenosine triphosphate. They make it, they go out there, they run it in the systems, they take off a phosphate that makes it adenosine diphosphate, ADP. It goes back in the system, gets reprogrammed, it gets another phosphate kicked into it, back out. It's a constant cycle. So the more orthophosphate you have in a plant, the higher the energy levels are in that plant. The push at a gallon to the acre, which you saw before, increases that sugar production directly and helps in bioregulation. It's a simple and complex sugar and organic acid. You have to be careful. If we're always just putting sugar on, you got to be careful, because sugar will feed both the good guys and the bad guys. And so when we go to Max Grow and some other things that's in here, we put organic acids in there because the organic acids will not feed the bad guys. So it's okay to help the plant get some energy and put some roots on, but if you're constantly feeding it lots and lots and lots and lots of sugar, and that's all you're feeding it, little by little, you're building in a little bit higher concentration of the bad guy organisms. So here we go. Phosphate facts, and this is critical. Plants only take up the orthophosphate form, not the poly. So the best 1034 in the business will give you 70% poly and 30% ortho. On an average, it's somewhere between 10 and 20% ortho. So that's one of the reasons why 1034O will build phosphate levels in the soil, because it sits there and it sits there and it sits there and it builds up and doesn't get converted and doesn't go into the plant. So in the off season, when it's converting really good, it just builds up in the soil. So you feel good. You're bringing up your soil phosphate levels. Good for you. But we don't want it in the soil. We want it in the plant. Right? 90% of phosphate must be made available through biological activity. This is from the university. 90% comes from biological activity.
What type of phosphate would be in chicken litter?
Some of that's already orthophosphate. Some of it's going to be that bound up as if it's from layers.
No, most of it usually is from broiler.
Broiler houses. So broiler houses, a lot of it's going to be orthophosphate. Some of it's going to be tied up with the other chemicals and micronutrients that get into the feedstuffs, because phosphate will react with copper, zinc, manganese, iron, calcium, magnesium, a lot of other elements. So a lot of times it's binding up before it ever gets to the field, and the way you release it is through the microbes. you pour Accelerate over the top of that, and it'll start breaking down a lot of those chemical compounds that have phosphate in it and make it available.
So that's why using something like that with chicken litter makes it so much more valuable.
Right, that's right. Now, in broiler litter, what do you have for the carrier? What?
I was thinking out loud. You got a lot more ammonia there.
Got a lot more ammonia. But what's as the carrier? What is it that's spread?
The sawdust or peanut hulls or whatever.
Exactly. What does that represent? That represents cellulose and lignin.
Okay.
Cellulose and lignin is the greatest percentage that makes up what? Fat. When you spray Accelerate over the top of that litter, you see if you bought a full yard, let's say a yard was a ton, and 10% of it was moisture, 1,800 pounds now, and 10% of it was actual nutrients. So now we're down to 1,600 pounds. So we got the water and the nutrients out. So now we got left is 1,600 pounds of cellulose and lignin. That is the single most important piece of that litter. You valued it for its nutrient base, but that's not the important part. You spread that litter over there, then you come back in and you spray Accelerate over that. As you break that manure down, it releases carbon dioxide up into the root zone and then up into the canopy. And where there's a waiting crop of sod above it, it's the carbon dioxide that's the limiting factor in all agricultural production. That's what all this business of the politics has been. We have carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. It's like, oh, it's messing up the world. No, it's not really. It's not messing up the world. It makes the world more efficient. But if we limit the carbon dioxide, just like we limit the sulfur and we limit other pieces, we can't grow as fast. So you put that litter out there, and the litter becomes magic, especially if you're using Accelerate with it, because now you're getting both the nutrients and the carbon to make energy, because it's carbon dioxide that runs the photosynthesis. It's absolutely fascinating. Roots, this is one of the most important thing for you. Roots have 10 times more sites on themselves to absorb orthophosphate than any other nutrient. That's how important phosphate is to the plant, which is why everybody's like, you just need self-phosphate. Okay, that's fine, but if we can't get the phosphate in the plant, we're spending a lot of money and getting nowhere fast. 10 times more sites. Now, is that just on big rhizomes? Is that on regular roots? Is that on fine roots? Is that on hair roots? It's everywhere. So the better the root mass is, the more sites you have, and if you have lots more sites and you turn the biology on, what happens to the availability of phosphate? And when the phosphate goes up and the energy level of the plant goes up as a result, what does the sod start to do? You see, it's all connected. And this is the exciting and the frustrating part, because it's like, look, we didn't sign up to go to master's degree sod growing today, but we should, because it's not that hard. And start realizing why we've done what we've done. It's starting to line up, and people are like, I just don't know if I can believe this crap. We're not putting out anything like we used to do with dry fertilizer, boys. And this sod's going like crazy. One of these days, it's going to hit the skids, and it's just going to stop. I'm like, when is that day? When was that day, Kenny? When is that day? You haven't seen it yet? How many years you growing sod?
Tell us your age, Kenny.
I don't know how many.
More than 2. And if you ever get scared, one part of it is if you ever get scared, it's easy to go call a fertilizer company and say,
Since 1988, whatever, ever, how many years that is.
The point being is, good luck trying to run the soil out of nutrients. There's so much bound up because of all the complex chemistry and everything else that goes on. You don't know how much is there. There's thousands of pounds, especially in these, we call the eastern coastal beach sands. They're loaded with phosphate. Thousands of pounds in the top, 0 to 10 inches. Cool soils suppress biology, right? Cool soils would suppress biology and the natural P release. So let's say you wanted to go out today and put some on. Now we're getting a little bit of temperature, but is it really, really good if we put it out today, we think the soil's going to be warmed up by tomorrow? So if we're relying on the microbial activity to release the phosphate that we want, but the soils are cold, we're not getting much, are we? So what do? we buy 725-5 because this is an 80% orthophosphate product with 20% poly, and the poly will break down during the year, but it's readily available. So you spray it on the plant. If the leaves are green, they'll absorb it. If they're not, it's going to go right down to the crown and be absorbed into the crown. And so you're going to get a safe and available phosphate for it. Your enhanced rooting leads to more feeding points and additional uptake from the applied or stored forms. If the soil starts to warm and you've cranked up the biology, if you've sprayed some Accelerate 50/50, you've got all this stuff going, and it starts warming up in the top, let's say 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. All of a sudden they start kicking in and they double up on phosphate availability. So you've got phosphate in the cold, cool conditions, and when the microbes crank up again, you're off to the races. So why would you go out and buy 10 gallons of orthophosphate to spray on? The answer is, you don't. You put it on in small pieces. I use this when frost is coming. You can spray this the morning of the night you're going to have a frost. It'll absorb in the orthophosphate. It will raise the sugars. I got pictures of stuff with frost all over it. Soybeans and corn, even in the early part of the spring, that they're picking it up from the soil, or you can spray it on top. We've done it on all kinds of fruit crops and stuff in the past to keep. What happens is when those sugars come up as a result of phosphate going into the plant, what does that do to the water concentration? It drives the water concentration down. What is it that freezes at 32? Water. What temperature does sugar freeze at? Well, it depends on the quantity of sugar. But you get sugar high enough. I have guys that can grow alfalfa up in our part of the world. We can get the sugar high enough that the alfalfa doesn't die from freezing anymore. Between the boron and the orthophosphate, we get them up high enough in the fall, you can go out all winter and it's soft tissue. Just like an evergreen. I'm telling you, weird things begin to happen when all of a sudden the plants get the sugar that they want, or they make the sugars that they want. High net increase in phosphate efficiency and utilization, a very safe and effective foliar product. It's not going to burn, not going to be so salty that it's going to give you any problem. So you got a 1-2 punch. You got 725-5 and SG Turf Pro and Accelerate 50/50. If you see where this is going now, you see where the programming comes in. If we have 725-5 that's immediately available phosphate, if it's cool and wet or it's cool and dark, it's just cool. Or it's hot and we have a lot of stress and we want to get the sugars to fight the stress, we put some on, it's immediately available. The Turf Pro and the Accelerate have biology, and that increases the rooting. If you saw how many of those organisms possess root enhancement ability. So you're telling the plant, hey, here's some root growth hormone. Make some plant. And by the way, if you make some roots and you got this our biology's down here, we'll get you some phosphate, so you're not going to run out of energy. It's like, crank it up, boys. Here we go. We're all going to have fun. It also makes micronutrients available to the plant through that possibility. High nutrient levels early in the season. The higher they are, the faster they are, the faster they kick in, the faster they grow, the faster they start to root. You increase the sugar content, you allow more energy to grow and fight the stress, and you increase the harvestability in the turf, both today and in frequency. How many of you are already thinking this is too good to be true? Because it's like it's like pulling ourselves off of the old fertilizer buggy, which we've used because it's quick, it's easy, it's straightforward. We know what we're paying, and we assume it's going to work because they just say it does. Then it should, because fertilizer works, right? Does it? I have people all the time. They're trying to check stuff, and I've had people now saying, because this stuff never scared me because I took these classes in college. None of this ever scared me. To me, it's the fertilizer that's the snake oil. Now, it doesn't make it bad, does it? We still have to have inputs. Don't call us anti-fertilizer. We sell fertilizer all the time. But the thing is, if we understand why now we are programming our plants with fertility inputs, the plant isn't confused about the message that we're sending. And this is the fun part about it, and that's what pushes the entirety of this program. I can't emphasize that enough. That the people who have started on the programs like this, who pick and choose the things they kind of want, if everything goes good for them in the way the season's set up, and they got that, it worked. And so if they do that another year and the weather goes 180 degrees the other way, it's like it didn't work this year. That's why we call it snake oil. No. You call it snake oil because you don't understand it, and you think the fertilizer would have done something different. And there's a chance that it might have, but there's also a big chance that it wouldn't have because you didn't know what the program was when you set it up. So if the guy that you're buying your fertilizer products from knows these things, you're way ahead of the curve, and so is he. That's a very, very rare situation. And there's not a thing wrong with that. You got one of those guys in your area, thank God. But generally, they don't have this background in it. It's not because they can't get it. It's just not offered and taught. I taught the soil fertility lab at Purdue University. I taught the basic introductory soils course. We were indoctrinated. The Potash and Phosphate Institute paid for my master's degree. I didn't pay a dime. I taught, and they paid. And when I got out and started saying, we don't need all this stuff, well, I'll tell you what, they never talked to me again. My major professor said, we lost one, boys. We don't know what happened. He went off the deep end. You're okay to think while you're here, but when you get out there now, don't be thinking, just be doing what we're telling you to. I'm like, hey, something don't smell right here. That's neat stuff. All right, I'm already into bad guys. These guys told me not to talk about fertilizer, so I'm already into that side. But here's the interesting part. There's a video here, and I don't think we're going to take time to play it because you think?
I mean,
do you want to play it?
If you have to hit enable content at the top.
It's not showing me that.
Yeah.
The point being, this is 1,000,000 times magnification inside of the plant. These little things are inside of cells, inside of cells, inside of cells. These are called thylakoids. They're little stacks of coins, look like coins right on top of each other. And on top of those thylakoids, you see how green they are. This is where the photosynthesis takes place. And the formation of this ATP stuff we're talking about. So this is inside a cell, just inside the edge of a plant. So University of California has done this, and so this is actually kind of supposed to be a sequoia tree. And they're going to get up close to the leaf, and they're going to go inside the leaf, and they're going to go up to 1,000,000 times magnification. So they're going to go backside of the leaf, and on the underside of the leaf is where the stomates are. The little, looks like lips that open and close. That's what these are starting to show. And they're going to I'm going to find one here that's open, and they're going to go inside. So you're now going to go inside the tissue of a plant. So all of these cells right on the inside, they're called parenchyma cells, just on the underside of this stomate, right along the underside of the leaf. And when you go in, you see it's like, oh my goodness, look, they're green. Well, they better be, because that's what's actually catching the sunlight, all these particular type cells. And they've got all these little special structures inside. And as we go deeper and deeper and deeper, we see, energy manufacturing things that are going on, the DNA pieces, the mitochondria. This is, my microbiologist says, oh, the Golgi apparatus. I'm like, no, microbiologist. When you figure you're going to say things nobody else understands. But you go down in here and see this is all intricate and with each other, because this energy that's being formed has to be shared to make the whole system work. You got to make the enzymes. You got to make the amino acids, the proteins, and the sugars are doing the work. But this is where the sugars basically start, along with this ATP I was talking about. When you go inside of this, now we are at 1,000,000 times magnification, and you got all these thylakoids. When sunlight strikes any one of these, it turns it on, and it causes these little engines, these enzymes that are on the surface of these. These are the enzymes, and you're going to see it's like a little pump and motor. And as the sunlight hits it, these things start to spin, and all these little pieces you're seeing coming off here looks like dandruff. That's ATP. They're taking phosphorus, running it through the enzyme system, and making this ATP molecule to ship all over the plant, so the plant has energy to do the things it needs to do. Now, this is 1,000,000 times magnification. Think about this. And this is all requiring phosphorus. And all these little pumps just spin, and out they come. So as long as light hits it, and it has its phosphate with all the other pieces, it's making all this stuff. So you can imagine, if we actually wanted to pull the phosphate from the soil, you can see how many of these things there are and how much phosphorus it really requires. And so when we're out here putting on a little bit of phosphorus from the back of the spinner spreader, we think we saved the world. Think how much more phosphorus is really required. And to get it in here, we had to get it all the way from the soil and the root system all the way up here. What happens if we spray a little on the leaves? He said, just like that. What happens when you get it in the crown? It goes right up. Just like that. It increases. So what I'm saying is, we're out here worried about how many total pounds of P we have in the soil, which is not an unimportant thing. But if we're managing phosphorus in some cases, a decent level, with soil biology working, phosphorus in the soil and phosphorus in the system, our system is working faster. It's working more efficiently because we put it near where the needs are. And like I said, at 1,000,000 times magnification, you're sitting there going, I really never knew that. None of us never knew. I mean, we knew what it was in theory, but until these guys actually showed us a little bit better. From what pictures they've been getting from electron microscopes and somebody put the animation together, you don't stop to think about it. Now, all of those enzyme pumps that were working, again, if the enzymes are made, they have to have what to make them function? Or otherwise they don't work. What did I say? Well, good. Micronutrients. You got to have You saw how small the enzyme is and big in the picture on surface. But all that enzyme, if it's built but it doesn't have its micronutrients, it doesn't work right. All of these things are intricately put together to a level of sophistication that none of us can spend our whole life figuring out. It's that complex. It's that simple, but it's that complex at the same time. And we're out here trying to figure out how to do it with maybe a 4014 with a couple of micronutrients in it and a little bit of limestone. Good for us. The fascinating thing is we got that far that fast with such a simple amount of stuff, right? But when we're trying to turn this thing upside down and crank out high quality premium sod every single time, now all of a sudden the picture changes. And this is how come it's doing it. And I think that's the fun part about it is as we begin to
Just arrow down, yeah.
Is there a baseline that you kind of have established as far as why is your available phosphate in the soil? What
In the
you
soil?
like to see?
Most typically what I've seen through the past is if we're managing something, even in the low to mid-teens, we got plenty. If we're doing that with the soil in the low to mid-teens and doing these other things at the same time, we're not running into any trouble. You haven't seen anything with major issues, right? And think about it, if you put manure out there, there's so much that what happens is, it's fascinating, if you've ever watched the phosphate levels in the soil where you put manure on, of course, if you're doing sod, it's a little tricky, but if you were doing some row crops years ago, right? And when you put on manure, what happened to the soil phosphate level? Well, they kind of climbed nice. Well, if you actually paid attention to your long-term testing program, it's like where we put the phosphate out with manure. Manure comes up and it seems to stay up. It still falls, but it doesn't fall like the dry fertilizer because dry fertilizer contains no carbon to feed the microbes. All that carbon in that manure feeds those microbes, and when those microbes are feeding around these roots, it's just releasing all the phosphate at time. And it stays for years. And it'll still go down, and you can shut it off and it'll still go down so far. But you crank that system back up with some more microbes, and it's funny how the phosphate jumps back up.
Has a structure to hold on to, doesn't leak.
That's right. There's all kinds of pieces of the puzzle that go in. I mean, that's a whole other seminar. If you don't think that this stuff goes on for days and days and weeks, you're grossly in error. I mean, the information and knowledge that's out there today. I did a day and a half of agronomy for some guys last week in Iowa. I said, "What topic do you want?" They said, "We don't care, just give it to us." They were walking out of there like beat dogs after a day and a half of me just sitting there giving them agronomy for a day and a half.
But don't you see this industry-wide as eyes are kind of opening up to this technology?
It has to.
Yeah,
because I'm one of the fortunate people who lived long enough to see my prediction come true. Back 30 years ago, I said, guys, you will include the natural system back into your program at some point because there's no way you can sustain what you're going to do for the productivity output that's necessary for efficiency on just salted fertilizer. If you understand that we're talking about the words of life, in order for life to communicate what it's doing, it has to understand the system that it's in, and everything in the system has to understand what it's in. So the only way you get more output out of this square foot, this half acre, this full acre, this quarter section, is you got to put more life into that system so that life understands that life can now persist and grow and continue to get more efficient because it won't do it on dry fertilizer. I predicted years ago, you'll be doing this. I lived long enough to see it. Because now what you've got is, at no point did anybody walk in and tell you you're going to throw away your fertilizer. But if you want fertilizer, which are natural supplements, I think that's one of the upcoming, one of the next few slides. When you understand that if you want to make sods stay together, and you want to make perfect pallets, and the throw out. I mean, there's no throw out in this system. How does that change the business? I don't have any throw out, and I got regrowth rates that are outstanding, and I got quality that people are begging for, and you can hold up pieces in one piece and it's not falling apart. You understand that whole system has to understand from top to bottom what it's doing, and when it does, that's supposed to be the outcome. That's supposed to be the outcome. It's predictable. And that system, when it's working together in sync, will provide it. It's just that all we're trying to do is now limit the amount of negative changes that we didn't know were negative before to make sure that we're not interrupting it. And we get faster and faster turnover and more cycles.
What about, we were talking about like phosphates and stuff, as the biology that's down there, as they live and die and their bodies break open and they're releasing that stuff. I mean, don't you get a series of cycling being that they
Yes.
live and die, and this everything stays right there because they eat it, they reproduce, they die, they break open, bury it. I mean, there's
life and death is always made fertility available. There was a time in history when people just got thrown in the ground. Best thing you could do is plant a tree over them, because they would become something more than they were in life by having a tree grow from them. I always said, if you want to murder somebody, go out there in the woods and bury them, but make sure you kind of put the stuff back and just bury a tree over them. They're not looking at the tree. People are like, that's kind of sick, but it does make some sense. Because, once that tree goes down in there and gets into that body, it's going to consume that body. All the pieces of the body will be consumed. Now, they can still find it, don't get me wrong. It's not going to eat it up overnight. But the whole point being is that life and death, when you rot down, just like a dead raccoon or a possum beside the road or a deer, if you ever watch the grass that grows around underneath that's some pretty fantastic grass. Because it's got sugars, amino acids, proteins, and enzymes in the live tissue that's breaking down, plus all those nutrients. And when we get years when, every 7 to 10 days we get, in our part of the world on row crops, we get 3/4 of an inch to an inch, and we're all worried about the fact we can't get out here and get our nitrogen on. See, we don't live in these sandy soils like you do, because each percent organic matter will give us 30 to 60 pounds of nitrogen. And the guys get all worried, and they're maybe halfway through the year and they haven't got their nitrogen on yet, and they got the prettiest corn crop you've ever seen in your life, and they ain't got any nitrogen on, they're scared to death. Yet the crop is perfect. Now they still have to get a little on, and they know that, but at some point it's like, well, if we have to, we'll get an airplane. But the longer those cycles go on, every 7 to 10 days, on an average, you're looking at organisms that will replicate after 5 to 20 minutes, and they may last for a day or 2 or 3, and then they'll die, and the offspring that's been created in the meantime is set in their cycling. So the more times you get cycles, the more nutrients you release. All nutrients in the biological form, which is that's the way plants were fed for thousands of years. That's the only way they knew how to get fed. Sustain the potential, or the growth potential. So in this situation, we were actually looking at what can we do to make sure that the growth that we've started doesn't go in reverse if something gets really bad and ugly. Well, we have SG Relief, which is an ethylene inhibitor. Ethylene is what causes things to ripen and shut down. When you get tomatoes that are green and bananas that are green that aren't fully ripened, they bring them in that way, and then they pop them with ethylene. Ethylene causes those crops to go ahead and ripen, and that's why oftentimes you got a yellow banana, and then you ripen it. And then you go to eat it, and it's like, that doesn't have much flavor. Well, because it didn't get the maximum amount of sugars when it was produced. If it's gone all the way to almost light yellow, then they shipped it, then they did it, it would be great. And that's where the organic bananas come in. Oftentimes the organic bananas, because they're produced with the biological system, they have higher sugars. So even when you shut them down too soon and then ripen them, they're always higher in sugar. If you've never tasted one of those, go get yourself an organic banana and try it side by side with a non-organic banana and see the difference in the flavor. We buy them just for the difference in the flavor. Just like bananas, I remember as a kid, it's like, that's what a banana is supposed to taste like. And it's the same thing with tomatoes. So we put that out there to take the stress down. It cools down the canopy. It tells the plant, look, don't go make an ethylene. There's a lot of stress here, but if you go make an ethylene, it's going to shut you down. And one of the first things it shuts down when ethylene is produced is its root mass. That's a reproductive thing. It's like, no, I'm going to finish, so just stop the root mass. You don't want them to stop the root mass, especially in the summer. These are what we call C4 plants. They are they love intense sunlight, they love intense heat and high humidity. They love it. Now, even though it can go beyond a certain point, if it gets to the point where it's a little high, you just put in SG relief and they'll go right on loving it. And this is what we've seen over time. We have it in the corn and soybean markets up home. And when people call us, it's like, what do we put on for a foliar right now? How much nutrient can we afford? I'm like, you don't put on nutrient in the middle of all this stress. You tell it, here's some energy, and don't go stressing yourself out and turn on ethylene. Just keep calm for another 7 to 10 days, and we'll see if it rains. Now here, you can just turn on the irrigator. But you can shut down extreme stress during certain cycles. That's going to get really bad. If it's going to get up to 101 to 110, it's like, that's not really good for the grass. But we can tell it, everything's going to be okay. Put it on and run some water even in the evenings. At night, it'll be fine. SG humic is humic acid, which is boatloads of organic carbon. 2 quarts to the acre. It takes out some of the bad guy chemicals that are inside. It will bind some of those toxins. It will feed the biology and it will capture nutrition. You're putting in portable CEC. So if you want to go back out there and put that in, and then you want to put a little dry nutrients over the top, the CEC that's in the humic acid isn't taken up, where in some cases the CEC of your soil is already kind of set in. It's like, now I'm about 70% calcium and 20% magnesium and maybe 3 to 5% potash and then maybe a few other micronutrients and some hydrogen. But when you put the humic in there, it's a clean slate, so you can actually put it right up in the top and you can kind of program it if you want to put the things in there that you need or want. Enforce. Enforce is nitrogen in the form of amino acids. So when you thought about a while ago what we just talked about, think about what you just saw with the thylakoids. We put on foliar amino acids, the nitrogen's in the right form. The plant doesn't have to make the amino acids. It can start forming and making the proteins and the enzymes that go on top of the thylakoids without having to spend any extra energy, and boom, it's off to the races, because this is the most recognized form as organic nitrogen. The amino acids are the most recognized form by plants that's been out there for thousands of years. So we actually include that as a part of the program, and you can put it on from the soil, but the most favored place, of course, is on the leaves.
Dan, on the Enforce, a lot of people will call us and they're like, hey, I saw this, on your website, or I heard about it. It's an 800 nitrogen, but amino acid forms. And the first question they always have is, well, how does that compare to conventional
28, 32.
Right. So maybe just talk about that for a second. We're talking about efficiency, right? How much more efficient getting in the plant is it than something that's much cheaper, let's say, to purchase?
Well, and so let's say if it weighs 10 pounds per gallon and it's an 800, so you're like, well, I'm only putting out like maybe 1.2, 1.6. If I put out a full gallon or 2 gallons, I'm only putting out 1 to 2 pounds of nitrogen. But I said before, what are amino acids? Those are sugars with nitrogen groups on them. So if it needs the amino acids and it doesn't have to spend any energy, that's one thing. If it does want the nitrogen, when it's left behind, it's loaded with what? Energy. And so what we see is 2800 or 3200 would be urea ammonium nitrate. 50% of it is nitrate. Right out of the chute, right out of the container, 50% of it's nitrate. So when you put that nitrate out there, nitrate programs the plant to do what? Causes the plant to grow. It doesn't grow the roots, it grows the tops. Here's a situation where when you go into a foliar situation like this, your foliar increase in efficiency is 6 to 10x. So if I put on 2 pounds of nitrogen as amino acid, not only am I going to get the increase of the efficiency because of the amino acid form, but 2 pounds is going to act like somewhere between 12 and 24. And that's what people are surprised. It's like, man, I put on some of this amino acid and plants are greening up, they're holding their green color, it's staying for several days, much different from the fertilizer. Why is that? Because of the way it's created. And the fact that the plant already recognizes it, so knows exactly what to do with every one of those amino acids.
The availability is there.
The recognition is there. The availability and the recognition, that's the difference. What about all this 28 as urea and nitrate and ammonium? Okay, there's some recognition. But in order for the urea, the ammonium, and the nitrate to move around the plant, it has to physically be attached to some carbon unit. It takes energy to attach it and move it around. The amino acid? None. So it's efficiency. Is fertilizer food? We call ourselves the plant food industry. How am I doing on time? About 9?
It's 10.
Is that good or bad?
That's good.
I can quit, don't we? How many want me to quit? Oh, okay, we're going. Fertilizer is necessary, but it's not food. If I have a stomach that's growling, and I take nutrient supplements, I don't accidentally think that if I take the cap off and just eat that whole bottle, it's going to make my stomach stop growling. They're supplements. They're not food. Maybe some kind of food in there, but that's not going to stop it, is it? So fertilizer is necessary, but it's not food. Okay? Crop food comes in forms like carbon, which is carbon dioxide. It can be in humic acids, fulvic acid, sugars. But carbon, which is it's an element. It's a letter C. It's carbon, and it's married into different forms. But they need a lot of food. Ever seen anything that's alive that doesn't eat? Are microbes alive? Are plants alive? That's funny. And even when they eat, they don't stop. We eat 3 times a day. Some of you guys look like you eat like 5 times a day, but we eat, right? We eat because we get hungry. We're feeding a need that we think that, since the plant can harvest sunlight, it just makes all the food it wants. Well, to a certain extent. But it always can make more food. And when it does, with the nutrients in balance with it, when it makes more food, it's more efficient in the way that it grows. And so in the same daylight, if you took a really bright sunny day and you gave it all the food that it needed with a few nutrients, it grows like crazy. On a cloudy day with grasses, bad news. So you need to keep more food even when cloudy cycles come. So here's a picture that Kenny took years ago. You want to make any comments about it?
That's on 419 Bermuda, probably in the early spring, sometime in mid-April to mid-May. We don't have no stress that time of the year, no heat stress. We do tend to get cold stress or too wet stress. We didn't have no heat stress. We were keeping the push program applied, and to make sure we have an excess of carbon, excess of plant food for the plant, and it went to town.
It went what?
It went to town.
Yeah, it took off when everything else was just sitting still, right? And I think that's the fun part about it. And obviously our measure of what's going to happen is how soon it comes in, what is the quality, what's the effectiveness of it, and here just a little bit of throw out in some spots, but very, very good high quality sod produced all the time, and with people asking for more. That's the fun part about this, is when you're doing it right, the quality that you're producing. It's always fun when somebody says, I bought some of that other stuff, but frankly, we're coming back to you guys. And if the price goes up a little bit, hey, I know, but this is good stuff, and we don't have any throw out. Our people are doing, they're throwing them all over the place, and it's not breaking up, and it's establishing good, and on it goes. People are looking for better quality stuff. Always, they're looking for better quality stuff. And I think that's the fun part. We've watched the production on Montrose Farm there go from moderate amount of acres to a boatload of acres because people want more. They just tell us this is good stuff, and they were going to other places that they thought was good stuff, and it's like, no, this is better stuff. They want the better stuff. Now, not everybody. There's always people out there looking to save every penny they can save, but the greatest majority of people, they've ever lived through poor quality sod or average quality sod that went the other way once it went down, or even. I think the fun part about this is how long it'll actually sit on the pallet without going bad. Because if all those roots are loaded up with all that energy, the number one thing you'll see, especially in hot, intense temperatures, is that there's 2 things. One is the temperature comes up on the pallet and the fungus goes like crazy. Well, guess what? There's not nearly as much fungus in here. And the reason fungus gets control of it is because it's eating all of the roots that can't protect themselves. These roots are high quality. So you'll keep the pallets longer. In a cycle, if it gains somebody delivered on Friday night, we forgot to put that out. So come Monday morning, it's like, oh crap, wonder what that's going to look like, right? You have too many troubles with that?
We do get some complaints because it's going to be somewhat yellow
By Monday. But it's not dead and squashy and wet, watery and dead. We see that a lot.
I think there's also a level of confidence. When you start using some of these things and you start seeing that, 2 weeks down the road, a month down the road, 6 months down the road, you got a good program going into dormancy, you shut that thing down good, and we've got how many months of no growing weather and all the opportunity in the world for that goes wrong, especially on the financial side, when you don't have to worry about 30, 40, maybe 50% loss across an acre. That stuff adds up quick, and so that's another side of this is knowing what you got before you get there, and having confidence in going hard something, not having to bounce the machine around or cut around certain areas or something like that. I mean, there's always going to be situations where you might not be able to harvest absolutely every acre because weather or some other physical conditions, but if you can count on most of that crop, I think it'll carry you far a long way when you start running up a belt and shipping it out.
One of the things that we help people understand, because when it comes down to the potash, you know how much potash you bought through the years, and everyone's always taking tissue levels, and they're trying to see how they can keep the tissue levels of potash up. Drives people absolutely insane, trying to figure out some of this stuff when they don't realize what's really going on. I said a while ago, the plant's a sugar machine, right? Boron is an element that there is no replacement for in the plant. In many cases, you could, for instance, if there was an iron necessary, but a manganese was there, sometimes manganese can substitute for iron back and forth. There is no substitute for boron. And what boron does is it causes a flow of all these sugars into the cells so that the cells can store them. Okay? Now, if the plant's a sugar machine and boron controls sugar flow, you've been around a long time, just like me. How much was the discussion of boron? Now you're in specialty crops down here, which will be a little different. But for our side up north, how much was boron really emphasized in the big picture in the last 40 years?
Probably in the last 20, a lot more for cell ball development and cotton mostly.
Right.
Where
And for years and years, you never heard a single thing about it. Because what was effective was boron flows sugars from the roots around the plants and into the cell. And you need good calcium levels to hold those cell walls together, because the more boron you try to push, or the more sugar you try to push into that cell gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, if it can't hold itself together, boop, it just pops and bursts. That's when it turns kind of white. And then it goes gray and dies because all the stuff that was supposed to be inside the cells is now outside because the cells blew up. So you got to have good calcium. But here's the other point. Potash's main function in plant is to regulate water flow. Potash regulates water flow. Boron regulates sugar flow. I said a while ago, the plant's a water machine. I didn't say that right. The plant's not a water machine. The plant's a sugar machine. So it lives and dies on its concentrations of sugar. If you've ever heard people talk about the bricks of sugar, the higher the level of sugar in the plant, the more efficient it is. If that's the case, a plant that's growing on higher sugar levels needs far, far, far less water to complete its cycle. And the Nobel laureate Peace Prize winner in physics debunked the whole carbon dioxide thing from the whole climate change thing, and actually physically said, because I've told this to people for 30 years, and I heard him say it, and I felt like I was in a really elite crowd. He looked out at me in the camera and he said, folks, if we get the carbon dioxide levels up in the environment, the plant makes more sugar, and a plant that's higher in sugar, folks, needs far, far less water. In a world where we're scared to death, we ain't got enough water, a plant higher in sugar needs far, far less water to complete the cycle. Because what happens when sugar and water get together? What happens to concentration of sugar?
Diluted.
It gets diluted. So if boron causes sugar flow and potash causes water flow, if we raise the boron levels, do we need more or less potash? And so over years, in the Midwest, where the fertilizer was being sold like candy, they were very successful in shutting down the whole boron legacy. Because if you didn't use boron and the sugars couldn't flow, the only way to get those sugars to flow around effectively in a plant was you had to do what? You had to bring in more water to move it around. And when you had to do that, you had to have potash. So a lot of the guys were like, we're not putting enough potash. I'm like, yeah, you're fine. Don't worry about it. What? You're fine. Now, if you want to put a little in, that's fine. But don't get carried away. You don't need lots and lots of potash. Well, that's where the tonnage comes from. No, the tonnage is coming from water. And we see that all the time. Because the higher they get the potash levels, you cut them and everything begins to wilt down fast and it just melts. So don't get concerned as long as you've got boron in the system coming in through the summer and bringing it into the fall, then late season protection is just now kind of a slow reversal of what we started in the spring. You don't want the plant to shut down if it doesn't have to. But you don't go out here throwing it full of fertilizer to get it to keep growing. You moderate the energy levels along with little micronutrients, little protectants, some NP and K. It's okay to put some NP and K out there. But don't put a lot, because if you're trying to put it out there and you're trying to force it to grow and do some things it's not ready to because of the temperatures, it's just going to kind of look at you and say, I have no idea why you're trying to make me do this. I'll try and do it, but you're messing me up here. I just want to keep putting my roots down. You don't care if it slows down as long as it's got enough coverage on top. You want it to keep making its roots. And this program late season will bring it into that realm. Because you're going back with all of the things we talked about before and putting in some phosphites in the tissue, going down to the roots and protecting the roots from being chewed off by the bad guy organisms. And if you use ammonium forms of nitrogen and what we showed you a while ago about the ammonium sulfate to keep the pH up, the micronutrients keep going in here, and all of this stuff just keeps looking the same way to the plant. You're not changing dramatically what the environment sees. It's like every time you slam it full of salt and fertilizer, it's like, good grief, there goes my microbes. Some of those are dying, and I got all this salt, and I don't recognize this, and I got to marry it on to some energy to move it around the plant. Good Lord, it's just going to stop. It's just sitting there looking at you like, okay, that's the program you want me to do. I got to do it because it can't walk away from the program. And so what we've got, and we go to a lot of the farms, you can see again, there's no throw out here. Of course, we doctored that up. Kenny went out through all that off the side. But there, this stuff this is one of the premier things that we get a lot of times. Guys are like, we're still harvesting. Sod's dormant, we're still harvesting. It's good, it's cutting, it's holding together, and this is what we're after. And the minute all that stuff decides it's going to start greening up, we don't go out there and just let's just throw the whole barn to it. No, we bring it back gently, and the roots stay on it. We've even got guys that are telling us, when we release the centipede to grow the seed, they'll grow the seed. Of course, it used to be whenever you grew the seed, then the centipede you took off of it, if you could take any off, would hold together. But now when they grow the seed, they get a great seed crop of stuff that germs really, really high quality, and it's like, we actually cut that stuff and it stayed together. We have no idea how you did that. It's like, we've done it for 15, 20 years. Same thing. I went back and said, when Werner's first asked me years ago, we want to release this stuff. What would you do? And I said, we'll do this, this, and this. Well, that's a little more costly than just fertilizer. I said, what do you want? He says, I want a lot of seed. I want it to be good. I said, that's what this is. And he put it out there, and sure as shoot, he's like, I've never seen centipede do this before. But he says, the real test will be what? Can I cut it when we're done? I'm like, well, you don't ask anybody else that. No, but we're going to ask you, and sure enough, he was able to cut it.
What did y'all get 3 harvests in y'all's centipede seed? Okay, numbers on it.
Which one is this?
Turn out good this year.
Which one is that?
I don't think so.
That's the one where you and Kenny are standing behind the pallets. You don't have to. I mean, I think just ask, see if there's questions or whatnot.
All right. Thus endeth the indoctrination, the education. Those are the things we wanted to cover because as you begin to look at it and you say to yourself, okay, again, I'm not expecting you to sit in here, grasp it all, understand it, and now become the local specialist. If you want to, have at it. What I'm saying is, all I was trying to do was introduce you to understand how the dots are getting connected. Because that's the important part. Because at some point, those of us who are young in our careers, right, you're going to have this figured out in a very short period of time. Those of us who are old are finishing out well. But the point is, if you understand how the dots are connected, if you want to continue to understand it, that's the important thing for you. You can call us and we're going to make sure it happens for you. If you don't, and you just say, hey, I get it. I understand where you're going. I'm buying into this. I want some products. Here's what I want to do. You tell me what to do. We'll do that. The fun part about this is, if you could imagine, what do you think you'd have to pay a consultant to do this? And if you did, what do they know? Because there's a lot of consultants out there, and some that are pretty darn good. But I've never seen a consultant marry these things together. They might be high and working with Honeywell and buy ammonium sulfate. They might be pretty high with a biostimulant company or two, and they're encouraging a biostimulant. And in the absence of any other help, those are really good steps in the right direction. They would be, wouldn't they? It just makes sense. So you're making headway. I don't run into too many people when it comes down to sitting down and talking about it, especially when they start asking questions of the consultant. If he's done this all his life and he's been a fertilizer consultant, he doesn't walk over into the realm of some of these other things very easily. Doesn't make him a bad consultant. I'm not saying anybody's bad. It's just the level of that information is going to make all the difference in the world in how quickly this whole program gets implemented and what are going to be the results. And I think that's the one thing that if I can emphasize more than anything else is when you start using these programs, depending on how much other fertilizer is already out there, sometimes it happens right away. Other times, depending on how long it takes for that fertilizer to begin to kind of dilute and be a removal of part of the old program, is going to have an impact on it. So don't get worried. It's like, hey, nothing's happening out here. Well, something will happen, and I guarantee you, it will happen. In most cases within the first season. But if it doesn't happen right away, don't get too discouraged. Because like, I'm not seeing this. I should have seen the roots overnight. Well, we're still laying there with a bunch of urea that turned to nitrate in the last 10 days. It's not going to happen right away. There are other things that will happen eventually, but don't get concerned. But I think it's important to recognize that as we're talking about this, we're trying to address each and every piece of the puzzle that you're trying to bring into to whatever you're doing at your farm. Because there are some that are probably going to make way more sense, some that don't make as much sense, some that need to be thrown completely away, and other things that can stay in there. That's what we're trying to do. And that's what we're trying to bring to the table for you guys to be able to see and understand how this thing functions. And it doesn't matter whether it's grass on the golf course, or sod out on the farm, or somebody that just wants a good program. Let's say they call you up and say, would you tell me how to grow good grass at my house? Well, you can do that. You can do that all day long. But if there's something out there that people are asking more of you, I think there's more meat and potatoes here than just meets the eye. And I think that's what we were trying to show you. Okay. Does that generate any questions?
So you think ammonium sulfate coming out of the gate, strictly no nitrates, just ammonium sulfate? Do we put any K in there, any potash?
Well, that's where I would come down to see exactly, what was it that what quantity we were putting out there. Because oftentimes, again, if we go back to the whole boron sequence, if we're running soils down here that are on average maybe 6 to 7 for a CEC at the most, where a lot of the sands or the silts are, we have more than that. We have some clay spots.
That would be a heavy soil.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
3 to 5 would
Right.
probably fit most soils.
Right. And so what I always go back to is the base saturation levels of those soils. If we're running somewhere around, let's say 2.2 to 2.6 or 7% base saturation of those soils, and we're using boron in our system, we've probably got enough to get the job done. So it's a matter of whether or not you want to throw out 50 pounds, 100 pounds, 200 pounds, and how often you're going to do it. It's more important along those lines, because if it's once a month and we're putting out minimal amounts, because as long as we've got water going onto that potash and just solubilizing a little bit of it for it to dissolve and get in the system, the other thing is if I think I'm dissolving all of that, that's one thing. But since I'm not, how much of that am I giving away? And that's a huge deal for what we're trying to accomplish out here. So, if we have potash in some of the foliar and we're marrying it together with minimal amounts of potash input, that's where I think we're going to make, again, one step in profitability. That's the whole point. It's like, this is the whole idea about growing good sod, but it's got to be profitable to do this and do it effectively and consistently and repeatable. And so, if you want to put some in based on the acreage, I look at the soil samples and go that way, not necessarily how many total parts per million or how many pounds. How many parts per million or pounds are represented in what holding capacity that we have.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the soil specifically.
Yeah.
Leave that down.
Yeah. And there is some potash in the minerals of the soil. And all we're trying to do is, if you understand that when we crank up the biology and the root masses in these, all of a sudden the clay that's in there, what little bit of clay and organic matter is in there, starts acting differently. And if that clay opens up properly, it releases some of that potash. And here it's not lots. Up our part of the world, we'll have 50 to 60,000 pounds in the top 0 to 8 inches in the minerals alone. Here it's not as much, but there are a number of minerals in the soil to do that potash, and so it's a part of the game. That's what most people don't ever effectively do, is they don't bring in any numbers from the soil itself, what the soil can provide, which is where we get all upside down, because we're thinking 100%, if it didn't get put there, it ain't there. And that's not true. So, but there again, how much when you put out potash per acre, how much do you normally put out? In a blend that would get spread, let's say, once a month or once every 2 months?
Probably 25 pounds. We use K-Mag at the farm because we have low magnum numbers.
Yeah. And when we go back to soil balance, those numbers that we put on the soil balance, so I'm just trying to think whether or not the last one I did for you showed those. If we run on a soil from, say, 2 to 4 on a CEC, we wait to see something around, let's say, 65%, 60 to 65% base saturation of calcium. We'd like to see somewhere between, if we can get it, between 15 and 20% magnesium, and then somewhere around, on an average, let's say, 3 to 4% potash at the very most. After that, it's really not that critical, because you're going to have some hydrogen from some ammonium sulfate and some other stuff. But the reason we're out there looking at that isn't always so much about the nutrient capabilities of the soil. The magnesium is part of it, but not so much the other stuff. It's about good biological management, because the biology works well in that realm. The salt concentration is not too high, the pH is just right, and the soil is holding water at its maximum amount. Because you need a little more magnesium in the soil to hold moisture down here, but you want a lot of calcium, because calcium holds moisture and lets it go. Magnesium holds moisture, but it doesn't let it go as easy. But it does help keep the soil a little more dense, and keeps water from flowing away. There's a lot of interesting things. So it's the physical characteristics that we want as a result of the balance. It's not so much the nutrient sufficiency, with the exception of magnesium, because if we get too low magnesium, then that's what's in the center of the chlorophyll molecule, and we can't make as much energy. We need the magnesium. And that's why we've gone to chelated magnesium and some other magnesiums, or K-Mag, in these soils to be able to keep the magnesium levels up, because we've got to get magnesium into these plants. That's what keeps them that really, really deep dark green. If you understand that sulfur can release magnesium, between sulfur and manganese, that's what really keeps a plant deep dark green. It's not the nitrogen. Nitrogen is important, but without those other three elements, and even nitrogen to a certain extent, the crop's not going to be its deepest green color.
Would you say more often than not, when sod farms implement the recommended push and foliar programs, that the outcome is less input on granular fertilizer?
I would say so. Okay, let's back up and see where they started in the first place.
Yeah.
But as a general rule,
We got to figure out where we're at.
Right. What I try to help people understand is, look, you've got a dry program. You've got a dry program. We know that. And there are other people who will jump in and say, okay, now we're going to get into some liquid. You just talked about 10 or 12 different products. What's the three that's most important besides you doing all 10 or 12? Oh, okay. So you got this thing all figured out. Well, not necessarily, but I'm not going to spend that kind of money. I understand that, sir. I do. I just help you understand that if you do this wrong, then all of a sudden you could turn your dry program into something that's not helping you. It could be hurt. Okay. And so I said, if you've got a dry program, let's say he's putting on 100 pounds a month of potassium, right? Why don't you cut out 50 pounds of dry potash? And what does that do to help you move into your liquid program? Because at some point, what you're going to understand is there's a marriage between the dry program and the liquid program. You now have both. And that's where your efficiency is going to change dramatically, and that's where your future is going to come from. And oftentimes, we have guys that actually will carve out the dollars for the liquid program right out of the dry. And oftentimes, some guys, it's actually cheaper to run both. Some guys, it costs more, just depending on what they're doing, because they weren't doing much at all to begin with. They're just kind of, keeping it barely alive and that kind of stuff. But oftentimes what we find is, by the time they actually make these changes, the number of crops that they get in a 2-year cycle is entirely different than what they used to. And they're now paying for an entirely extra crop. And it's like, well, man, that fertilizer is really not costing anything at this point, because I got an extra crop or two. So it changes with every place that you go to. But as a general rule, yes, they put out the liquid.
Generally speaking, when you go and teach everybody about this at their farm.
Right.
They cut down on their granular
Right.
costs because they realized they didn't need that much to begin with.
That's right. And the other thing is, you gotta realize, if you've ever used ammonium sulfate plant at the time, if you cut out urea or you cut out ammonium nitrate and you bring in ammonium sulfate, have you ever noticed what happens to the top growth?
That's what I was gonna ask.
You're gonna ask that.
Well, I was gonna ask, what kind of, when you're cutting, you're able to cut your nitrogen back, the difference between your lateral and vertical growth, you know, like out here especially, I need to use growth regulators quite a bit. If I'm
Because of the
cutting
excessive growth.
vertical,
Yeah.
but I mean, I'll use all the lateral I can get, but, if we're not putting that much nitrogen on it, we're switching over, is it gonna suppress my vertical growth, so I'm not having to cut so much?
Right. You got an answer for that?
Yes, it is gonna suppress or slow down the vertical growth, maybe not enough that you'll get away from the,
PGR,
primo and such.
right?
You're probably gonna have to continue that to accomplish what you want to, but it does slow down the vertical growth. I noticed it, Dan, that was one of the first things you ever taught me. Back in 2005, I actually moved to Colorado and put a sod farm in out there, which was mostly bluegrass, some fescue. And I've not met Dan yet. My local co-op said, let's put on urea. And so that's what we did. And I was a one-man show early on. It was a 300-acre farm. We weren't harvesting, so we didn't have no cash flow. I was out there keeping it mowed. I mean, as we plant out there, all you do is keep it mowed, sprayed, whatever. And I was working my tail off to keep that grass mowed enough. And then Dan came along, actually the dealer out there, his name was Trey also, come along and brought Dan and Greg's dad, and they started teaching me, hey, you need to start using ammonium sulfate for your nitrogen. It will slow your crop growth down. And it did. I noticed it then more so. I'm maybe not as close to it now, seeing it with the Bermudas and the Zoysias and the centipede, but that made a stark contrast when we switched over from urea to ammonium sulfate as our nitrogen source.
What's your nitrogen source now?
Just fertilizer.
What kind are you using? Ammonium sulfate or
Well, it's
urea?
It's a mix.
It's probably gonna be urea.
Okay. I just wondered if it may already be
Just
there.
bag fertilizer like.
Yeah.
It's probably.
Well, I get
May have some ammonium sulfate, just to get it slowed there.
Yeah. Now, let's slow down just 1 second and think this through. If I was in a situation where I wanted to get a lot of top growth, because this is what we ran into with him and his neighbor who actually encouraged him to do some of this stuff. His neighbor was Japanese and his dad was really from Japan, Japanese, moved over here and he was growing sod. And he was constantly complaining to the son, we don't have enough top growth. They're growing bluegrass sod. He said, our top growth is slow. He called me and says, Dad's complaining about the top growth. I said, that's easy to fix. I said, you really don't care until people start coming out to look at the sod and decide whether they're going to buy it, right? That's right. I said, otherwise they're driving by at 5 every day. You might be looking at it, but most guys aren't coming out because they're not from this area. They're not driving by. They are, no. I said, so when you want that top growth to come, you just go out there and throw on a little urea or ammonium nitrate. And it'll come within a matter of just a few days. And so you won't take the roots completely off of it and you're rocking and rolling and ready to go. His dad did not believe that until a guy came in there to put fertilizer on. And he spilled the fertilizer in a strip about 8 foot wide, the back of the truck when they were dumping it. He spilled it, when it was a spot there. And so in the grass, where this 8-foot strip was dropped down and it was heavy fertilizer, that took off growing. And there was grass that tall, bluegrass that tall, beside all this other stuff that was having a hard time growing, right? What was having a hard time growing? That's just when he had 1%. And he goes out there and takes his son and puts his face down and says, see, this is what I'm telling you. Well, if we let her cut that grass, not a bit of that grass would hold together. It didn't have any roots on it. It was all tops. There was not a single, hardly any root down there underneath it. It had spread out into the other areas where it had gone away from the fertilizer and was feeding over there, but there wasn't any roots underneath that stuff. And that's when he started to learn his lesson. So if it's something that you're looking to try to get some top growth quickly, or let's say you want to get growing, you want to get a little grow in, but you got to be careful on how much growing you're looking at, depending on how important it is to keep those roots underneath. You can split the hairs out here and put a few things in. So if you want to throw a little ammonium nitrate with your ammonium sulfate to get a little faster regrowth, that's fine. But you keep on it, and it's going to start robbing the roots to grow the tops too fast, and so you'll get out of whack. But that's the whole point. So, and that's a part of the art of growing the grass, because you get to see that, you kind of measure the conditions and see what's headed your way, what you just come from, what you're headed to for the weather, and you get to make those choices.
Yeah, we want the roots, we want the tensile strength, but
Yes.
also we want to seal it up.
Right.
So it's
That's
out.
correct.
We don't care about.
Correct. Right. And so, if you now understand that when I showed you the pictures of the treated and the untreated side by side, the more total root mass you put under that crop, the rate of regrowth increases dramatically. And so and when you're first getting started, it's a little more of a fine line. But once you're on the program for just the first year or so, that begins to take care of itself almost immediately because of the root depth and the energy stored underneath it. Because once it starts to come, it'll come very fast. And it will be enough. You're cutting off enough rhizomes that they're popping up more evenly, and so you're going to get a more even distribution of the way that regrowth comes in. Is that right, Kenny?
And I feel like as we're talking about regrowth and harvestability and everything, but as we're loading these things up, and these guys work with golf courses on the West Coast for decades now, but we're looking at the overall plant health to harvest it, but then on your side, if you look at playability, if you got a lot of foot traffic, you got balls, people driving up and down this stuff, beating the heck out of it. I mean, with all the stored energy in there, it can repair itself a lot faster. It's got all the reserves to do it with. It's getting beat up, banged up, and everything. This stuff, it keeps its strength, keeps its health there, and even the color too for the people that want to walk around and complain about color on your golf course. This kind of helps mend some of those situations as well.
So especially the chelated micronutrients, if you get them in there properly. We don't just use EDTA for chelates. We have other amino acids in there that we use to chelate these micronutrients. And so the amino acids, when the plant sees the amino acids, it pulls the amino acids in because it wants amino acids, and it just tears them apart and releases the nutrients to you. So you can actually get the color to come up and stay up with foliar treatments of different micronutrient combinations, whether it's in the SG Advance or we have a product, SG Balance, which has all these micronutrients varied into them. So you can just want micronutrients, you can spray them at any given time, and all the individual micronutrients if you wanted them as well. So, and I think that's the fun part about it. We carry a lot of different things because you can't always have everything for everybody. It just doesn't work that way.
The Accelerate on golf greens it's awesome. I mean, we've been using it out there since 2008, 2010. Guys that have a lot of thatch or black layer, and we've had all different scenarios with reclaimed water being used and too much thatch and everything. And if you've got any of those type of situations, we put it out like once a month, or you can put out every 2 weeks if you want. And the microbes in there they don't only just eat up the thatch. I mean, they'll get down in there and clean up black layer and all that as well. So it's a real natural way of, and encouraging roots and biology all at the same time. So
there's a lot of nutrients and a lot of energy in that black layer garbage. It's a septic tank, what it is. It's a little small portable septic tank, and you just clean it all up and it releases all that stuff. We've walked across greens before that's so spongy. It's like, how in the world do you function on this? Is that we're not doing real well? That's part of the problem. Or we've had kikuyu grass out there that might have 2 inches of that. You walk across it and your foot goes in a full inch just walking across it. And they'll go out and spray that stuff, a very short period of time. They're like, how in the world does this stuff do what it does? I said, do you really want to know? Or you just have knowledge? He says, I don't want to say it that way. Maybe I'd just be well off and just accept it. It's not hard. But it's just, most people are just, they're after the results, not the science. But it's amazing what it'll actually do. And it removes a lot of barriers that are causing difficulty for grass to grow properly.
We spent a lot, obviously, on fertilizer, a lot of trying to cut back a little bit. I think we can kind of balance that program. But we're looking at, and I've got to send a sample. We've got hemp biosol source.
Okay.
And we got chicken litter up north that we're going gonna try to start incorporating on grow back, I have to sell them, so I'll go back and send.
Both are independent?
Well, we've got both sources. I didn't know if stacked on, we could send them all, but anything we can do for, we've got access.
Right. There's not a thing wrong with either one of those products going out there. You just gotta be cautious on a low CEC soil, how much you're gonna spread.
Yes.
Because there's two things. We're looking at organic material becoming organic matter, and then the quality of that organic matter. Because there's such a thing as quantity of organic matter and then quality. What's the quality? The quality is the breakdown rate that you get that organic matter turned into humic acid. So humic acid is the quality of the organic matter. If you get too much raw carbon out there, the microbes eat first at the table of the soil, and the plants get the leftovers. So if you put an excessive amount of total carbon on your soil, the microbes are pre-programmed that they go eat it. And when they eat it, they have to have nitrogen to break it down. So the carbon to nitrogen ratio comes into play. Now, most people don't even, they've heard that, but they have no idea what that means.
Ties up your nitrogen.
I'm sorry?
Ties up your
It ties up your nitrogen. So, you could actually send in a soil test to, say, to a Haney, somebody who does a Haney test, and they would actually give you the carbon to nitrogen number. They could also tell you what the carbon to nitrogen number is of the hemp. You can have it tested prior, so you know about what's going in there. So you can calculate how much that you need or want to put out there.
So a lower CEC is bad, maybe?
Well, lower CEC is obviously the quantity you're putting in there. It's going to build up faster, and so you can actually upset the curve faster because there's not a lot of stored nitrogen in that low CEC. Okay. Now it doesn't mean that if something does start going wrong, you're going to have to put in more nitrogen. That's the problem. It's like, let's put in enough to make sure that everything's working right, but let's not put in so much, because if we do, then we're going to have to put in nitrogen. Here's an example. A guy out in Kansas came to me back 25 years ago, and he said, I'm losing the farm. He says, I've got irrigated crop ground out here, and he says, I'm putting on manure, and manure is supposed to have all this fertilizer in it. He says, I'm using 300 pounds of nitrogen, Dan, to try to grow a 150 bushel crop, and I'm losing the farm. I said, for goodness sakes, Merle, how much manure are you putting on? He said, it's free. All I got to do is drive to northern Kansas. I said, you did not answer the question. Oh, we said, since it's free, I'm putting on 28 ton. I said, 28 ton of manure? I said, is this dry beef manure? Yes. I said, you can't do that. Why? He said, I can. I said, you shouldn't. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I said, what you don't understand is that manure is starting to be worked on by the microbes, and there's not enough nitrogen being released from that manure to sustain the microbial breakdown, and they're tying up all your nitrogen. So for a number of years, until this thing actually works its process out, you're paying extremely high amounts of prices to get the job done. His eyes got about that big around. He says, I wouldn't have believed you, but he says, now it makes sense, because he said 5 years ago when I started this process, he said, now the soils that are 5 years old, he says, I'm putting on 150 pounds of nitrogen and growing a 300 bushel crop. I said, yeah, because now you're through the system of the microbes chewing up all your nitrogen. They broke it all down. He learned his lesson that, it wasn't working good for him, so he just shut off out there. And so now those soils are really enriched. It's changed over to humic acid. The soil's holding lots and lots of stuff, and he only needs half the nitrogen to grow twice the crop. So what I'm saying is, all this stuff is going to make the hemp a good product. It's just a matter of making sure that you don't get carried away and try to put too much on it to make the soil become something that it can't become because of that low CEC carriage. Yeah. So
I sent a sample off on that. I just pulled it Friday, so.
Where'd you send Where'd you send it?
Waters.
Okay.
Do they do a Haney test there?
I'm not sure what
If
test.
they do one, you might call and ask if they've still got it. They run a Haney test on it and see. It's a more expensive test, and it will actually give you a carbon to nitrogen number, and with that number, you can more safely predict how much you really should put out.
I think it's safe. We had the right amount, yeah.
And the nice thing about it is, it's all raw carbon.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
hemp's been around for thousands of years. It's not like it's something so brand new that the soil can't work on it. It has all the enzymes to work on it. The beauty of it is, if you put that out there, and if you wanted to throw a little nitrogen out with some Accelerate 50/50, you'll begin to break that stuff down and turn it into humic acid because of the microbes in the Accelerate. So you can actually do it, and just like you would do with the manure, the poultry litter, with all of the shavings and everything in the poultry litter, do the same thing there. It's just another source of it. So if it's coming for free or close to it, then you're going to turn it into something valuable in your soil. The most important thing is not to get too carried away, because people want to fix a problem too fast and then they get things out of whack. It's like, I don't know what's going on here. And you know, if you get so much humic acid out there too fast, and sometimes you'll need a little more herbicide, because certain herbicides will tie up on the humic acid, and it might make it a little more challenging. But I wouldn't worry about that problem. That's something that would happen, you know, differently down the line. If you're doing everything right to start, it shouldn't make a big deal. And that's, I think that's the fun part about it. You can imagine, that's what makes soil so challenging. Soils are an infinite rate of variables changing at an infinite rate. You can't put it in a box. The best thing you can do, get it close, let it function, manage it, because that's what we're called to be, is farm managers and soil managers. You get it close and then just manage it right, and you know, let nature take its course. It's always a lot more successful than you trying to figure out every single starting piece and have it perfect and this ratio right, this ratio right. Oh, you just drive yourself insane. Just get it close, manage the mayhem with biology and food sources and a little bit of nitrogen and some of these other pieces, and it'll do amazing things. And that's what the pictures are. And I think that's the frustrating thing. We're excited about what we do. Always have been, always will be, because invariably, if it's something that's measurable or needs to be important and different, these programs pay out because there's a biological piece to it. And that's the one part that nobody understands, and it's the single most important part.
Have you guys done, Kenny?
I don't think so.